And welcome back to this the corner of Women's Geographer. Today we have a very interesting and very special interview with Sophie Bowlby. And the name of this interview is Gender, Geographies of Home and Care. Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to introduce Sophie. She has a really long bio. And yeah, she's also a very nice person. So first of all, let's talk about her bio, and then we will start with the questions. So Sophie studied geography at the University of Cambridge in 1966, and also she did a PhD at the Northwestern University in Chicago in the US. The PhD concerned how access and mobility affected people's knowledge in the urban environment. She then returned to England and spent most of her career as a tenured academic in geography at the University of Reading before retiring in 2010. She was a visiting professor at Loughborough between 2016 and 2023 and remains a research active honorary visiting research fellow at Reading. She was a member of a small group of pioneering geographers who promoted feminist research and institutional recognition of feminist geography in Britain in the early 1980s. Her research has concerned feminist analysis of the social and economic geography of urban areas in the UK, and issues of access and mobility have remained an important focus for her. For the last 25 years, she has focused on social relationships and informal care in time and space. This work has focused primarily on research into women's involvement in informal care work across the life course. It has encompassed not only care relationships between individuals, including childcare and elder care, but also care provided through formal volunteering activities and the role of friendship in care. She has been particularly concerned with how social relationships of care are formed in and flow through time and space. This work argues that memories, anticipations, and habits influence what people do. But it also argues that social relationships which develop through time are influenced by the space in which they take place. Along with Linda McKee and others, she has developed the framework of caring-scapes and carescapes as an heuristic for exploring care activities and relationships. The caring-scapes framework is now being further developed into an ecology of care for exploring both informal and formal care relations. Her recent research has extended into this approach into study of daycare work in residential care homes and in domiciliary care. And last but not least, Sophie has been an honorary fellow of the Royal Geographical Society since 2024 in recognition of her outstanding support for geography and especially of geographies of home and care. So first of all, congratulations for this honor, Sophie, and also thank you very much for being here with us, and also being with the broken arm, right? So, just for saying that this is not so dramatic, that she's here with us, and yeah, we really thank you for the time.
You're very welcome. I look forward to it.
Okay, so as we always start the interviews to our interviewees, we always have two common questions. The first one is, when did you know that you wanted to become a geographer?
When I was about 16, when I was at school, I had a very good geography teacher. He made it sound very exciting. I don't think I would think now it was exciting, but then I thought it was, I mean, what he was talking about. I didn't understand what being a geographer meant, but I knew I wanted to study it.
Mm-hmm. I think for me it was also more or less when I was 16 too. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good.
It wasn't because of the teacher, but because of the contents of geography. So once you finish your studies in Cambridge, were you clear about what you wanted to specialize in? So there were already people working on geography of home and care?
No, not at all at that time. No, and I didn't get to that till much later, actually. When I went to do my PhD, I was very excited by new ideas about geography. These are now old ideas about geography, but at the time they were very new and exciting. The idea of theoretical geography and quantitative geography. And so the place to go to do that was in America. And also I fancied going to America, so I thought it would be fun and exciting. And I didn't really think of becoming a professional geographer. I just thought, I like this, I want to do more of it. And so I went to do my PhD. And then, well, first a master's and then a PhD. And then I just got excited by it and thought, oh yes, I still want to go on doing this. But I decided to come back to England rather than stay in America.
And you were one of the first people studying geographies of home, right?
I was really one of the first. I was one of a group of people studying feminist geographies, and so through feminist geographies we started looking at care, home, and particularly at that time the role of childcare, and but also women's role in the workforce, which was also a neglected topic, because people thought of women's paid work as trivial, which it wasn't. But
So before we start with the next question, I remembered some interviews before, so I think it was in February or March 2024. We were already talking with another geographer from Romania, and we mentioned for the first time geographies of home, and we said that we don't even have a translation in Spanish. No, no one would say geografía del hogar because it doesn't exist here. So that's why we wanted to explain these two strands of interest, which are very, very unusual in Spain, and just to give us like a better explanation on what do they mean for us geographers.
Okay, well, I'll start with home. I think that the term home is just similar to the Spanish word hogar. Yes, yeah. It has, because it has the connotation not just of a house, not just of four walls, but of a meaning, something. It has a whole lot of cultural associations. And so home is sort of an idea, but it's also practices, it's also things we do. We create home through our everyday actions, or we hope we do. And home, our ideas about home affect how we behave every day, what we do, what we think we ought to do, how we ought to be when we're in the home. So I think in terms of geography, you can link home to two ideas which are very important in geography. And one is the idea of place, and the other is the idea of space and mobility. But before I go on to talk about that, I should say that although home, we think of it as the dwelling, the vivienda, yes? Of course, we also think of home as a country. If you travel, if you go away on a holiday or for work, you often think, oh, we're going home, and you mean not only the house, but also to Spain, if that's your home. So in that, we'll talk about that later, because that becomes quite important in studies of home linked to migration. But going back to this sort of idea of place, a home you can think of it as just a singular place, an enclosed space, the walls of the home. That we can think of how we think about that, and our ideas of that. And one of the sets of ideas about home that people often talk about, and which are very common in everyday culture, is the idea that the home is secure, that it's safe, that it's private. We can keep people we don't want out of the home. You can say you can't come in. It's a place of freedom where we can behave as we want. And often people think of the home as a very female sphere, as a place where women are important. It's a domestic space, not like the world of work and things outside.
Mhm.
But if we think of both those ideas, the singular space and the home as this lovely space of security, immediately you can think, hang on a minute, that's not really quite how it works. So first of all, there is actually an internal geography of the home, if you like. There's a geography of who has power in different spaces. Where can you be private, if you can? Do you have a room of your own? What role does the kitchen play, the sitting room? They will have different meanings and different ways of being used. So there's a geography there, which means it may be freer or more private or more female or more male in different areas. And then, of course, the home is secure. Very quickly, we can think about the home for many people is not secure. It can be a place of abuse. It can be very unsafe. It can be insecure because you have no legal right to stay there. You may be in a house that you rent, but the landlord can get rid of you. He or she can say you must go. Also with this idea that the home is a private sphere, when you start thinking about it, I don't know what the law is like in Spain, but in England, the state has the right to come into your home, the police, or people who think, quite perhaps we would think very rightly, if you mistreat your children, they can come in and say, we'll stop it. The state has rules about, quite good rules about safety and how the home should be built. But it's not entirely private. But as we'll go on to, it's also very linked to what happens outside. The other thing is, of course, that the home we think of very much as the place where family relationships are practiced and are formed. And those relationships can be positive. We would like them to be positive, but they or often can be negative. So there's a whole range of things from being caring, so it's a space of care, to being abusive or violent at one end, and a lot in between, because a lot of caring relationships are sometimes mixed. They can be obligations, they can be used as weapons against other people, as well as being loving and care sounds so nice, but maybe it isn't always. So once you start thinking of those things, a whole range of possible topics open up for geographers, really, about the situations in which the home is or is not safe and secure. What happens when people have insecure homes? What does that do to people? What about homelessness? And interestingly, I think a lot of us noticed this in COVID, when you had to stay in the home. There was a great deal of problems for women of abuse. And of course, in many, there were not, but there was still a lot of problems about care, about childcare, who was responsible for the children when everybody had to stay at home, and the difficulties of living in an enclosed space. So there is now work beginning to come out about the experiences of being at home with COVID by geographers. So the other thing I said was the home. You can think of it in relation as a place in relation to other places, a space in space. Where are homes, and who lives in them, and how do we get the home can be a sort of base. For most of us, it's a base. You go out to work, you go back to the home, you go out to shop, you go back to the home. So where homes are relative to other things is very important to how things function, to how the home functions and the workplace functions, but also just boring things like traffic and commuting and all that kind of thing. Not boring, really, very important. So the home is a sort of base for commuting, for provisioning, and also for relationships with neighbours. So that becomes an important issue as well, to think about the differences between being in a home where you have nice relationships with your neighbours and you feel secure. What if outside that home it's very dangerous? There are people, there are gangs, there are drug dealers, etc. So those sorts of issues as well. And as I already mentioned, we can't really think of the home as this nice little separate space, because the state does have control, law, and we need those things. But we shouldn't think of it as somewhere that is entirely separate. And I mentioned at the beginning that we can think of the home as the house, or on a big scale as a country. And of course, one of the big problems of or issues of our age is migration, and people going to live in many other countries, of diasporas, of people whose families are scattered all over the country, all over the globe. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean for their experience of home? The home, in the small sense of where they live, and in the big sense of how what is their relationship to their country of origin, and to their families who may be scattered in many different places. So I think those sort of basic ideas give you the idea of many different types of work, of research that can be done by geographers, looking at how and where homes are, who's in them, what situations make homes, by and large, actual homes, as we would like to think of them, secure. In what situations are they insecure and temporary, and places actually of pain and abuse. So shall I stop there, or shall I go on to talk about care?
I was just mesmerized listening to you. So maybe what we can is continue with the other one, with the geographies of care.
Okay, so obviously geographies of care, and in fact that's just how I became interested in geographies of care, was in thinking about childcare, and the home as a very important site for childcare. And if you start thinking about the home and care, you can immediately see that some kinds of home are much more helpful for care than others. If you're looking after an elderly person, if you're looking after them in a home which is warm, is secure, has running water and all those things, that's a very different thing to looking after somebody in a cold home where you feel you might be chucked out any time, and so forth. So there's an important link between home and care, and people often make a distinction when talking about care, and I'm quite conscious that the term care and geographies of care is a very Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American way of looking at things, because the word care in English is a very broad term. It means many different things. It doesn't distinguish. There isn't a different word for care when you're looking after somebody who's ill, or care when you just care about somebody, that you like them and you want to look after them. So a lot of when we talk about care in English geography, we're thinking of this very broad meaning. But a distinction that can be made is between the idea of caring about, which I think in Spanish is preocuparse de. Caring about.
Caring about is like looking after.
Yes, looking. It's not looking after. It's thinking. it's caring about is saying, oh, I really
You are concerned about this.
I'm concerned about them, but I may not be doing anything about it. Of course, if you are concerned about something, say I'm concerned about poverty, you know, there are poor people, I'm worried about that, and I care about it, then I may end up giving money, I may end up doing something, but I might not. I might just care about them and, you know, do nothing. But if you care about it, it can lead to action. Or sometimes, so there's a distinction between caring about and caring for. So
I know this phrase of theirs.
For it's like actually doing something. So, you know, of course, parents generally care about their children, but they also do a lot of things with them in order to look after them. So caring is actually the mixture of caring about and caring for. But sometimes caring for somebody can lead you to care about them, because you may feel obliged to look after somebody, even though you don't terribly like them or you don't know them. But through caring for them, you may then create a bond and start to care about them. And caring about can lead to caring for. And the other important idea with care is that it includes self-care. So it's very important to be able to look after yourself. Now I've broken my arm, I find there are things I can't do for myself. It's very difficult to, well, when I first broke it, it was very difficult to wash my hair. And it's difficult to cook, to chop things up, to, you know, things like,
is difficult.
you know,
Get dressed.
Yes, get dressed, absolutely, yes. So actually, we shouldn't neglect self-care and situations that allow people to look after themselves. And that you might say, well, most people normally, when they haven't broken their arm, they can look after themselves. But actually, you may be in situations where that's very, very difficult. Of course, if you have a disability, if you're elderly and frail, or if you're a child, you have a limited ability to look after yourself. You need other people. And so there's always, we all need to care for one another or we wouldn't survive. You know, a baby left on its own will die. But we normally care for babies, and then they are fine. And we care with our friends and our families. We look after them. So those are very important features of care because they involve social relationships, and that will affect how much people are cared for and how far they're able to flourish. Now, I'm using the idea that this term flourish because that's a term that philosophers use a lot about human beings flourishing and becoming, having as good a life as they can. So we are interdependent, and so care is necessary to us all. So with geographies of care, also we make a distinction between informal care, where you're not paid, and formal care, like doctors and nurses, or childcare assistants who are paid, or, you know, so there are people who are paid to care, and there are people who do it for love.
Or people who do it twice, so once at home with their family and also at hospital or
Indeed.
At home. Yeah.
And when you look at who does care, so if you think about the people often talk about we should look at who, where, when, and why. Well, who, in terms of care, is very, in terms of paid care, is largely women. Most paid carers for elderly people are women. It's a very, very female-dominated profession. But informal care also has been, in the past certainly, very much seen as care for children, especially, and care for elderly people, as a woman's job. Now, that has been changing in some countries. In England, it's been changing, but it's still much more women's role. And COVID was another interesting case where we saw that when people had to look after children at home or elderly parents, that women did more of that work. Again, it's not that men didn't do any, but women did more of that work. I mean, actually, objectively, that's what the data show. And it was much more difficult for women who had other paid jobs because of that. And so that tells you, makes you think about, in more generally, when it's not COVID, a lot of women's time has been historically and now spent on care, which means they have less time for other things.
Absolutely.
We all know that.
We will talk about that in another question later.
Okay, yes, I know, yes. And another important feature of care, a lot of care requires, and this is a very geographical idea, it requires co-presence. We have to be co-presence. We have to be in the same space.
Yeah.
Of course, you can care about your child who's at school in a different space to you, but then the child falls over and hurts themselves, and the school rings you up and says, please come and pick up your child, take them home and look after them. And you have to be there with them to do that. And a lot of care requires you to be there in the same space. Thinking also of looking after elderly people, a lot of the care they need is to be fed. They need help with washing and going to the toilet. These are all very physical things. And you need to be, you could be very sympathetic, but if you're not there, you can't help them. And so that's
24 hours per day. Yeah.
Yes, and it's really, and also a lot of care is very temporally variable. That is, it varies over time. We particularly have habits. We get up and eat. We have breakfast. So if you're looking after an older person, they need their breakfast. They need to be got up. They need all that care at a certain time. Then they maybe can sit and do whatever they want or move around. But then they need lunch. And then they need to go to bed in the evening. So, we have bodily rhythms, which, we need sleep and so forth. And so care and co-present care is often difficult to organize because everybody needs, it's like a rush hour. There's a rush hour for care. And it's similarly with children, there's a rush hour once they're at school age, they have to be got to school, So it's a very much time and space is very intertwined when we think about the difficulties of organizing care. Now, more recently, very recently, people have begun to say, but we can have the internet. We can talk to people. We're talking now through the internet. And of course, you can give a lot of care, mental care, support. That's very important. And in fact, an important new aspect of caring for older people is often to help them use the internet to talk to family members who are no longer, or friends who are not local. And that makes them feel a lot better. So it's, that's an important thing you can do. Also, people are inventing machines which will tell you, so that somebody hasn't moved around, and so we ought to go and see if they're all right.
Or webcams too.
Yes, webcams, exactly, to follow, to see what's happening, are they moving, and so forth. But I still think that these things are important. They can also change sometimes help the carer, but they can also, of course, be new tasks. So it's very good that the older person can talk to their cousin in America but it means that then you have an obligation to help them do it if they can't do it by themselves. But also a lot of these, there's a danger that some of the equipment may mean you lose the interpersonal relationship, which I think is very important for care and for people to feel confident in the care, whether that's informal care or formal care. So if I just briefly end by saying a bit about this idea of caringscapes and carescapes. The idea of caringscape is that when you're thinking of care, giving care, in a, say, looking after a child, it's tied up with all sorts of other places all over the place. So there's a landscape of care. Where is the school? Where is the park you go to play? Where are their friends? What is the transport that gets you there? So there are many people involved in this caring activity in different places and at different times, and you have to link them together. And we have memories of how care is done. So from our own childhood, you may think, if you have a happy childhood, you think, oh, I'd like to be a mother like my mother, who's lovely. Or you may think, I want to be very different from my mother, who wasn't lovely. But the memories influence how we behave and how we perform care. And also our hopes for the future. We have ideas about. I remember indeed before I gave birth to my son, I had an idea of a wonderful world in which everything would be beautifully organized, and I would go to work and it would be so easy. And then, of course, the reality came about. It wasn't quite like that.
Sometimes I even thought at the beginning with my first child that I would have a carpet here in my office and he would be playing, I would be working. That was absolutely impossible for me. It's unthinkable.
It's unthinkable, completely unthinkable. Yes, and I realized very quickly at home when my child was no longer a baby but small. The minute I sat down in front of the computer or a book, he could have been playing very happily, but the minute I did that,
Yeah.
Mummy. So yes, you realize that these plans of the future are not quite going to work, but they influence your decision, of course, because you think, of course I can do this.
Yeah, but you can't.
You can't, yes.
If they are awake, you have to play with them, or it's impossible to work and take care. This is completely impossible.
Yes, yes. So, and that's a very important geography of where they are, where you are, time, traveling between the two, and where are other friends or facilities. That's all very important, and that's a caringscape, if you like. And now I would say an ecology of care. So we think of all the things that go towards helping or hindering caring, making it easier or often much harder.
It's like creating landmarks in the city and then paths to connect them, right? So from home to,
absolutely. So you can think of how people travel, the time at which they travel, where are these things, Yes, exactly as you say. Yeah. So
very interesting concept.
there's a whole geography of study there.
Okay, so thank you for this wonderful explanation. I think if anyone in Spain weren't sure about what means geography of home and geography of care, I think after your explanation, they can understand much better the situation. So let's go. Can we?
Yes.
Have you finished with this? Okay,
no, I finished. Yes, fine. I'll just see how we were doing.
So just coming back again to the geography of home, and I wanted to connect an article from 2004 from Alice Blunt and Anne Berkeley, also from the UK. They published geographies of home in cultural geographies. And they stated that pretty much what you said before, right? So rather than view the home as a fixed, bounded, and confining location, geographies of home traverse scales from the domestic to the global in both material and symbolic ways, right? So how and to what extent the microscale of the home is interconnected with the global scale of analysis in consumption, gender roles, or care roles?
Well, I think in very big ways. I mean, first of all, I mentioned already this idea of migration. So, so that there are people moving and creating micro homes, which are still connected to other spaces far beyond. But in terms of consumption, thinking of retailing and shopping and things like that, we every day in our home are consuming things, at least in places like Spain and Britain, we're consuming food and goods that were created elsewhere. So we are part of a huge web of connections. You know, if I can buy, especially in England, I can buy a lot of vegetables from Spain. So that connects us right away. And again, COVID was interesting because sometimes things we couldn't get things because of problems in the geographies of supply. And those became issues for the home. I don't know whether it happened in Spain, but in kind of amusing in Britain, there was terrible worry about whether we would get enough toilet paper.
Yeah, here too.
And stockpiling, you know, toilet paper. So that is a sort of illustration, actually, of those things that we take for granted because normally they're just there and they're created through these global webs are important. So that at the material level, I think. But when we think of gender roles and care roles, well, in care, a huge number of paid workers are migrants. In Europe and in Spain, a lot of paid care workers who are looking after elderly people are migrants, either from Eastern Europe. In Spain, obviously, you can have a lot of EU migrants within the EU. So from Poland or
Bulgaria.
yes, yeah. In England, now we're no longer, sadly, part of the EU. We have a lot of migrants from Africa and India and the Philippines who come to do paid work. So there are really big flows of people, and that's actually often very bad work for them. They're very poorly paid. It's very insecure work. It can be very difficult work, especially if you're living in somebody's home. For some, I don't know how certainly in Britain, for some of the migrants who come, they have a visa to come and act as care workers. But if their employer doesn't pay them or pays badly or whatever, and they want to leave, that means they have to leave Britain. They have to find another employer, and they only have a very short space of time in which to do it. So they're actually very vulnerable to exploitation and to being paid badly. So yes, so that yes, there's care is actually very bound up with migration, and care in the home specifically, what we call domiciliary care, looking after people in their own homes. That's very much done by people who are migrants. But also gender roles, given people busy watching Netflix and Disney or whatever, ideas about gender roles are circulate, you know, through film, through novels, through social media. So again, there's quite a lot of ways in which it's connected. What goes on in the home is actually connected to ideas that come from outside, as well as things and materials that come from outside. Hope that's an answer.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So we met because of written geography, so your participation in written geography. So your work on written geography and geographies of home explains the direct connection between urban planning, as you said, the house as a space of consumption and also as a place of decision. And in 1984, you wrote an article, Planning for Women to Shop in Post-War Britain. It was published in Environmental and Planning D, Society and Space. And you said already 40 years ago that innumerable geographic and planning studies have assumed unquestioningly that household shopping is and always will be naturally a woman's task. So after so many years, do you perceive any gender changes in the assignment of this task? Already we are both
Yes,
laughing. So
and no, yes and no. I mean, of course, well, certainly in Britain, since I wrote that the number of people living alone has increased. So there are more men living alone, and they do have to go and shop for themselves, or they have to pay for people to send food in, you know, pizzas or whatever. So you do see also in the stores more men shopping for themselves, and but also there has been a shift in the sharing of domestic tasks, with men taking on more, but still it's still unequal. And I think when it comes to shopping, men do the shopping more than they used to, but it's often under the direction of the woman. So the woman still has the task of planning, saying we need cereal, we need bacon, we need whatever it is. So the shopping list and the organization and thinking ahead, that still is often a woman's task. But there is a shift. I want to be positive. It is changing. So there may be. I couldn't. There's some people who don't think it's a woman's task, but there's still a lot of people who do.
yeah, and what you said is the woman or the woman in charge of the home is the one who's saying what we need or what we have to buy or this thing must be prepared. Not in all cases, right? But yeah, I think, and still there are so many women that they don't want to abandon this role at home.
Yes, and I hear in America there are some women who very much want the trad wife. They want.
Yes. Yeah. Doing everything from the scratch, right? So with 7 children around, yeah. Yeah, this is now a new trend. Yeah.
Yes, a new trend. Yes. So and there is of course some of those women see they don't want they don't want the extra work of combining paid work and domestic work, but it puts them in in my opinion, it puts them in a vulnerable position should the relationship that they're in fail, because if you want to leave, you need some money. And you need to be able to.
I think it can be wonderful when it works.
Yes.
But when it doesn't work, it can be a nightmare.
Yes. You're in a very
dangerous because so evolution was for something, right? So, and also all the rights. But anyway, I think this is something that they decide and is trusted among the couple. I don't know. I don't really know what to think about that.
I don't know what to think because I don't know enough. I just read about this and think, oh dear.
Okay, so continuing a bit now with the topic of geographies of care, and in a TED talk, and I'm completely addicted to TED talks, and the TED talk, unpaid work that GDP ignores and why it really counts. held in Christchurch in New Zealand in 2019 by Marilyn Waring. She talked about the definition of the GDP indicator in 1953, drawn by Western educated men. Right? So these men established a boundary of production, measuring everything that involved a market transaction, legally or illegally, right? So she said that on one side of the boundary, everything where there was a market exchange was counted. It doesn't matter whether, yeah, as I said, it was legal or illegal. And on the other side of this boundary of production, the work done by the people they call non-primary producers was of little or no value, right? So we have been talking about all this work done at home or out of the home, just related to care. So a big part of our days is based on caring. Yeah, so I think I'm caring all the time between 5 until 9 o'clock at the following day. So yeah, so we're always caring and doing the laundry, folding the laundry, cleaning the house, bringing the children to school or to extracurricular activities. And this is something that never ends, right? So this is the mental load of caring and home is unbelievable, right? So, but at the same time, all these tasks are invisible, right? So what is the cost of this invisibility of the care, right? And if you think this is higher for women or not.
I think the cost is enormous. And I mean, that in some cases, people have tried to quantify it. In Britain, as you have in Spain, a lot of women stop working to look after elderly parents. Or if they don't stop working, they reduce their work. They go part-time, they only work a little time. And so they do a huge amount of work that is unpaid, looking after elderly family members, or sometimes disabled family members who are younger. And that people have said, well, what would that cost if you paid for it? If those women weren't there, you would have to pay workers to do that. And it's an enormous cost. I haven't got the actual numbers, but you can then multiply that, for childcare and so forth. So it's a huge benefit to the country that you're living in. And for women, it's a huge expenditure of time on things that are not recognized. And I think one of the main problems for women is, it's an everyday problem because it takes up a lot of time. So you have less time for other things, like maybe your paid work or your hobby or whatever. But also, it means that because it's not paid and not valued in money, it means it's also not valued in socially, and people don't see it as important. If you say to them, is it important? They say, of course, yes, it's very important. But they don't act as if it's important. It's just taken for granted. And I think I've noticed this is in universities and doubtless in all workplaces, the jobs done by other people, you always think that they're much easier than the job you're doing because you don't really know what they do. You may see it's important. Certainly, a lot of university work is hidden. If you're reading articles and things like that, it's not very visible. So you always think that that other person down the corridor in a different office, their job is much easier than mine. Mine's really hard. But they're thinking, your job's very easy too. But I think with caring, it's the same. Yes, oh, yes. Work is, of course, looking after children's difficult. And yes, and the shopping's difficult. But it's not really difficult, not compared to the job I do, working as either as a physical worker or as a mental worker. So I think it's led to a very long-standing underestimation of the significance of care.
Mm-hmm. And especially because taking care of others or staying at home with children it has been studied or analyzed that it's one of the most stressful jobs, right?
Yes.
So, and it never ends.
Yes.
So yeah, when after the maternity leave, when I came back to my office, that was holidays. Yeah, I was here on my own. I could listen to my thoughts, and yeah, it was so easy to work and to concentrate on the things I have to work in.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Yes. And that, the work I've been doing recently is looking at paid care workers, people who care in people's homes, and they're very, very badly paid. And that, I think, is because people think it's easy. Anybody, it's unskilled. They like to say it's unskilled. Anybody can do it. Well, anybody can't do it, and it's not unskilled, but it's not rewarded, and it's all linked together. The undervaluation of care, in, for children in the home and cleaning the house and all that. It's linked to the underpayment also of paid care workers as well. We just don't think care is important, except when we don't have it, then we think it's very important.
Yeah, this is completely true, and especially, for example, for childcare,
Yes.
the salaries of especially women who are taking care of children during for people to
Yes.
be able to work productively, right?
Yes.
This
Yes.
productive work is very low, right? So yeah,
So
and and I think sometimes when I left my children in the kindergarten, I thought that this is one of the most stressful jobs that and especially when they're really, really young. So they have to change the diapers, they have to take care of 13 or 15 children, and they are not really well paid. Absolutely not.
and there aren't
Yeah.
enough of them usually.
Sorry, what?
There aren't enough of them. They're not enough. They're not, there are too many children for a worker, and because people won't pay enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we would pay for the real amount of money, then these people should, I think maybe the system would collapse. Yeah, because
Yes,
we are
it would collapse.
Mhm. We are used that these things are done by people with really low salaries.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mm.
And just for finishing, the last question about these geographies of home and care, we wanted to finish all these questions with the principle of care. Yeah, so when care and not GDP or economic growth is the main focus on production, distribution, consumption, post-consumption, and care, yeah, what changes?
Well, if we really did it a lot, because if you think of care as important, if you think of that as a really important social thing that has to happen, then, as I said, any particular care that you're giving, looking after this child, this old person, this friend who's in distress, each of those is connected to many other things. And often the social situation in which you care is not helping you care, it's hindering you care, it's making it difficult for you to care. And so I think it would be, you'd have to arrange society so that care was valued and made as easy as it can be. I mean, care is never going to be easy, but I mean, you can have the physical surroundings and you can have the mental support from others that make it easier. So it would be a transformation. It would be a totally different.
Yeah, and maybe this is what we need because it's not just care for other people, also care for the environment, for the planet.
Yes,
So
yes,
if we would change the focus instead of having economic growth and just thinking on the GDP and we just apply the principle of care, I think the world would
yes.
be wonderful.
Well, there's a well-known definition of care, which I will not quote correctly because I haven't got it in front of me, by a Joan Tronto, who is a great person who writes Joan Tronto, Tronto, and Joan, Joan. And she's a philosopher, but she's written a lot about care and what care is. And she says it's all the things we do to keep our world operating, from the people in it to the environment. So if you really think about that, then it's pretty important.
Yeah, and also connected with the principle of love, right? So
yes,
you
indeed.
think, yeah,
Indeed.
that would be completely different.
So
okay, I finished? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much, Sophie, for all these questions. I think it was very enlightening and very interesting, and I really hope that more people in Spain would follow these strands of interest in the future. Thanks to you, and also thanks to all this information you gave us. And finally, we would like to ask you some other questions that we always include in our interviews. And they are more about things which are not very, very geographic, but they are more related to your personal interests. Yeah. So the first one is that you can give us the name of a historical figure who made you an impression.
Oh, well, for me, my hero, and it is a man, is Alexander von Humboldt.
Of course.
And he, just such an amazing person. And there's a very wonderful biography of him by somebody called Andrea Wolf, WULF, WULF. And she called it the inventor of nature. But he was the person who really began to really noticed what we would now call the ecology of the world. And he was just amazing. He traveled everywhere. He went all over South America. And he was the person who first really systematically, he observed in Latin America how the human exploitation of an area was completely destroying the ecosystem. And that was the first time that people he'd really put it that way. So he's just an amazing person. So that's my hero.
A historical female scientist?
Well, I thought of two here, both British. Ada Lovelace. I don't know whether you've heard of her. She was a computer. She started the first computer, but also somebody called Lady Mary Montagu. And she was interesting. She went with her husband to live in Turkey. He was a diplomat. And she wrote about traveling to Turkey and all about her experiences there. So she was a Victorian, 18th century, not earlier. So she was one of the first female writers about travel. But while she was there, she learned about inoculation against smallpox, which the Turks were doing. And she took these ideas back to Britain, and the people were she had her own children inoculated against smallpox, and they didn't get it. And she persuaded many other people to do this. And then much later, a man called Jenner found that you could inoculate people with cowpox, which was a disease of cattle, and that would also prevent smallpox. It was not as dangerous as what she had brought back. And unfortunately, he's very, very famous, and she is not. But she should be famous. She was very determined.
We also had an interview about the Matilda effect.
All right.
So, in geography. So yeah. A reference in your development as a geographer?
Am I allowed to cheat and mention 3?
Perfect. Yeah.
When I was a student, I read a book by a man called William Bungay called Theoretical Geography, which was about new ideas about quantification in geography. And I was in my second year, and I thought it was the most exciting thing I'd ever read. That's what took me to America, really. And then later I read David Harvey's book, Social Justice in the City, which was another wow, you know, different way of looking at the world. This is it. And then, not a geographer, but a very important, for me, a woman called Anne Oakley, who was a sociologist, and she wrote a book called The Sociology of Housework. So it was all about just being a housewife. And that was, and she wrote that in 1974. So that was the third wow. So we can look at things differently. And these are more important things to get worried about.
So you started your career very quantitative, like
yes,
in
I was
a very quantitative
very
way,
much a
right?
quantitative geographer. Yes, my thesis used all sorts of quantification, but now I don't do that. But I'm glad I did, because that means I can understand it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So a book or a reading?
Well, because I've been talking about the home, I think Alison Blunt and Robin Dowling's book are just called Home, which they wrote originally. Well, there's a new edition out, 2022. So
there is another book called Geography of Home, and it's written by an architecture, I think. And she's not a geographer, but she's also talking about the division of the home.
Oh, the internal.
And I read it thinking, yeah, and I read it thinking that it was about geography of home, but it wasn't.
Not well. Alison Blunt is about geography of home. I mean, it's very much cultural geography, but she's done really interesting things. And she and her colleagues have just brought out a new book, but a lot of them about looking at experiences in London during COVID of home. So, but anyway, so that would be, but that Blunt and Dowling book, now 2022, called Home, I think that would be my recommendation. Yes.
Good. And now something to eat, a typical dish from your hometown or from Reading, or I don't know, where are you from?
Well, I'm actually from Birmingham,
Okay.
but I will say a typical dish from English cooking, which my mother used to make, which was extremely good, is called steak and kidney pudding. Do you know of this? With
kidney from kidneys. Pudding.
yes, steak, kidneys, and steak. So it's cow meat, and you make it in a basin, in a bowl, and with a something we call a suet crust, which is the fat of cows too. It's very light and when it's made well, it's very delicious, very delicious. Anyway, so.
It doesn't seem very light.
No, it is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, no, not the meat, but the crust is very light.
And just for finishing, an unforgettable route or place. It can be local and it doesn't need to be in United Kingdom.
I had great difficulty with this because there were so many possibilities. But in the end, I shall go back to my student days in America, because I was able to drive around America. For one summer vacation, I took a car and went on a journey, and I drove from Chicago, where I was studying, to the Rockies, to the Rocky Mountains. So what was unforgettable was driving across all that huge flat plain forever and ever and ever, and then seeing the mountains. It was wonderful, and driving into the mountains. And I went and spent a week at Colorado National Park, which was just fantastic, beautiful. Yes, and there is a big mountain there called Pikes Peak, from which you can see over the plains, actually. And you can only climb it with another person. It's not a climate. I don't mean climate as in, climbers, but you can only go up it with another person. And I was lucky because there was another woman and we both wanted to do this. So you have to sleep the night at the bottom in a tent and then go up. So we both went up and it was just fabulous.
I will search it.
So Colorado National Park, definitely worth visiting.
Okay, so Sophie, we're finished. We're done with the interview. It was a pleasure. It was fantastic to listen to you. And yeah, so thanks for your time and also thanks for participating in this Women's Geographies Corner.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I mean, it's been really fun to do and nice to exchange experiences. And I hope it's useful.
And I'm going to say it also in Spanish because we know that you are capable to say to speak a bit in Spanish. So, muchas gracias por haber participado en esta entrevista.
Ah, gracias mucho.
Okay, so I hope that we can disseminate and we can spread this interview. YouTube, please, in the UK. And I hope that it's interesting for many people.
Right. Okay, then.
Okay, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's lovely.
The same to you. Bye.
Bye.